Chapter 22 of Man of Many Minds. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Josh Broussard. Man of Many Minds by E. Everett Evans. Chapter 22. They certainly are building a great fleet, sire, on a planet they call Algon, Hanlon stated crisply, and almost gave a yell of glee as the Emperor's mind fleetingly called up a picture, distorted as though it had only been described to him, of one of the greenies. He hurriedly continued punching. I know His Highness was the guiding mind behind that, for I was supposed to be working for him, and I've just come back from 4 months there. The Emperor started to deny it, but Admiral Howardin stepped closer to the desk and fixed the monarch with a stern eye. We don't wish to be discourteous or insolent, sire, but we know that you do know something about this. Wait, please. He held up his hand as the Emperor opened his mouth, so apparently about to demand an apology for the lese majesty of calling him a liar. We do not believe that you were doing this of your own accord, nor that you initiated the conspiracy. But we do feel positive that you know something about it. And for the peace of the Federation, we must have every possible scrap of information you can give us. The Emperor became gradually less antagonistic, and as his face flushed, his eyes became pleading. He struggled to go on. Then, realizing that something was holding him back, changed the subject slightly. I hope, gentlemen, you will forgive me. I don't know what has come over me these past years. I think you know, Howardin, that I was always heartily in favor of the Federation, and did all I could to make it a force for peace throughout the system. I know only too well how interplanetary war would wreck all our economies, and I do not want that. But I seem to have changed these last years, and I didn't want to. It was almost a sob. The Admiral, as man to man, went quickly around the desk and laid his hand comfortingly on the Imperial shoulder. We all felt that, sire. You were far too great a ruler to have changed so radically. It puzzled and saddened us all. But now, I believe we can begin to see the reason. And it doesn't harm you in our estimation, now that we realize you couldn't help it. The Emperor raised puzzled eyes. What do you mean by that? May I answer that, sire? Hanlon stepped forward. We know now that Goth Bor wasn't human. He was an alien from... An alien? The Emperor quavered. Yes, sire, definitely. We do not yet know where he came from originally, but we do know that he had considerable more, or different, mental powers in some ways than most humans. You are under some sort of a compulsion or hypnosis that prevents you from speaking out. The fact that your health failed and your body deteriorated so rapidly proves it was against your desires. The Emperor was startled by that, and his body shook with a palsy. He repeated his query dully. An alien. Hanlon and Howardin nodded silently. After a moment, Hanlon took a deep breath and dared the question. May we have permission to search Bower's quarters and offices to see what evidence we can find that will perhaps tell us more about his projects? His Majesty straightened with decision, and years seemed to drop from his face and figure. You certainly may. I'll give orders at once, and you can send in as many of your experts as you desire. I can sense the need for speed. Hanlon bowed his thanks, and the Admiral voiced his. That is very gracious, sire. The Corps thanks you. The Emperor was gaining strength, and his old shrewdness by the moment. What about that fleet you say is being built on some other planet? Hanlon noticed that hesitation, and guessed the reason. But for the moment, he let it lie, and answered the question. It is not yet a serious menace, sire, but will be shortly if not taken into the Corps' hands. Admiral Howardin explained further that the Grand Fleet was being assembled, and he would cope with the problem within days. Good, good. Call on us for whatever assistance we can give. They talked over many details for some time, and then the Admiral rose as though to take his leave. But Hanlon wasn't ready yet. He wanted to pick up that matter he had let lie some minutes ago. He stepped up to the desk and looked straight into the Imperial eyes. Sire, please think hard with all your will. I believe you know more about Boer's plans, but that the knowledge was hypnotically sealed in your subconscious. Boer had that power, we know. Please try to break that seal. Boer is dead now. His compulsion can no longer bind you. The Emperor seemed doubtful, but at Hanlon's continued, assured insistence, finally agreed to try. He concentrated for long, agonizing minutes. Great beads of sweat stood out on his white, strained face, and his hands clenched into tight balls. Hanlon almost repented, and thought of breaking the spell and telling the suffering ruler that it didn't matter that much, that they could get the knowledge elsewhere. But he had to have those facts. And if he could suffer as he had done, so could others. But just then, the Emperor suddenly relaxed. His features became more composed and natural, and he smiled in relief. It is coming now. He wiped his face with his silk handkerchief. Boer did boast to me that he would one day rule the galaxy. But then he told me I must forget what he had said, and I did. That speech seemed to release him still further from the awful tension that had held him for so many years. He was weary, but happy. He didn't tell me much in detail, as nearly as I can remember, merely that plans were being made to gain control of this planet, then the Federation, and after that, the whole galaxy. Did he say who was with him in this outrageous undertaking? Howardin gasped, and Hanlon added, We mean, was he alone in it, or was some other planet or system backing him? The Emperor thought steadily for a time, then shook his head. I don't seem to remember, he sighed sadly. Nor could he, after half an hour's more concentration. I am sorry I cannot give you that information, gentlemen. But you will soon, we trust, have reason to believe that we are once more desirous of doing everything possible for the peace and well-being of the Federation. There were tears in Admiral Howardin's eyes, and he impulsively stepped forward and grasped the Emperor's hand. Welcome back, sire, he said sincerely. Back at base, there were messages awaiting that had come in while they were gone. The Admiral handed one of them to Hanlon. It was terse, but brought a happy smile to his face. Coming immediately, with full crew. Congratulations, Newton. Others were from Grand Fleet, regarding the measures being taken for the fleet rendezvous and the part the Cimedian sector was to play. Another was from the planetographers, giving the spatial location of Algon, with the note that they had finally found it on a star map, and that a survey ship was being sent there at once. Hanlon punched a stud. Stay away from Algon, he rapped out when the scientist's face appeared on the screen. Don't send that ship until you get permission. Just forget all about even having heard of Algon. The elder looked questioningly at the youthful civilian giving him such orders. I don't know. Howardin speaking. The Admiral pushed Hanlon aside and glared into the screen. That's an order. Forget it as you were told. Yes, sir. It's forgotten. Hanlon turned wearily to the Admiral. I'm minus on sleep and strength right now, sir. I think I'll go get some rest. In the morning, I'll come back and we'll start searching Boer's stuff. Right. I could use some caulking off myself. Couple more orders, then I'm going home. Do you want to bunk here at base? No, guess I'd better go back to the hotel. I can't appear here too much, you know. might be recognized by some Terran officer. And that brings up a problem. What will be my apparent status before the crews during the searching? Civilian specialist, called in by the Corps. Howardin was used to quick decisions. We often use such. I'll sign a pass for you. Better use a disguise and a different name, hadn't you? Hanlon nodded. False mustache, skin darkened, contact lenses to color my eyes, and I'll call myself Spencer Newton. Howardin looked surprised. You pick a name fast. The Secret Service man grinned back. It's the one I was born with. And then the Admiral really was surprised, but asked no questions. He filled in the pass with that name. Better come directly into this private office. When they met in the morning, Howardin complimented Hanlon on his disguise, then quickly reported he had already assembled crews, and one was working at the Imperial Palace, and the other at the ex-Prime Minister's own residence. Good. Hanlon was well rested, and his voice was crisp. I think I'll start at Bower's place. The two officers left base, a staff car rushing them to the ministerial residence. They entered, and Howardin led the way down a hall towards Bower's private office. But, just as they reached the door and were turning to go in, Hanlon suddenly pushed the Admiral past it, then jumped across the opening himself. Howardin turned in puzzlement, but Hanlon signaled quiet and led him into a small reception room adjoining. There's one man in there you'll have to get rid of before I can go in, he explained in a swift whisper. Young junior lieutenant named Dick Trowbridge. He'd recognize me even in this disguise. How'd he ever get here to Syme? Trowbridge? Oh, yes. He was here from Terra when we asked Prime for a code expert. That's right. Dick was a code specialist. Hanlon nodded. He was my roommate all through cadet school, he explained. It would give the whole works away if he saw me here. He's our only good decoder. Admiral Howardin frowned. We lost our best man. We'll have to use him if any code shows up. I realize that, but send him away for now. If we get code, we can send it to him at base. Right, sir. I'll fake an excuse. Some 5 minutes later, Howardin returned. All clear now, sir. They started out, then Hanlon stopped the Admiral with a hand on his arm. Please, sir. His face was flaming, his eyes miserable, but his voice was fairly steady. Please, don't call me sir all the time. It may be that my position as a Secret Service man carries that distinction, but it makes me nervous. A youngster like me has no business being called sir by top brass like you, who has worked nearly half a century to achieve the honor. Admiral Howardin grinned suddenly, and hugged Hanlon with a fatherly gesture. You're all right, son. And I'm for you. From now on, you're simply Newton. Anything to make you... Hey, Newton. Are you... Hanlon nodded. His son. The Admiral's eyes glowed. Wonderful man, your dad. One of the Corps' greatest. The young man swallowed hard. I think so, too. They had been working nearly a quarter of an hour, sorting through the voluminous papers in the minister's desk and files, when another Corps lieutenant came in, his hand bandaged. What happened to you, Patrick? Howardin asked in surprise. That blasted Tugin bit me, and I had to get my hand dressed. What Tugin? One that must have been Bower's pet. It was flying all around the room, yelling and cussing us out. I was crossing into the corner of the room, there, when it screamed and bulleted over, slashing my hand when I threw it up to protect my face. Another of the men spoke up. Took 3 of us to capture it, and I wanted to wring its neck, but Captain Bannister wouldn't let me. So we stuffed it into its cage and sent it back to the zoo. Hanlon was intensely interested in this, but one thing puzzled him. He signaled Howardin to one side and asked in a whisper, What's a Tugin? A native bird here, much like your Terran parrots, but with even more beautiful plumage. And they can talk much better than parrots. They seem to have quite a lot of intelligence. Hanlon was instantly alert. Get it back here for me." Puzzled, but unquestioning, the Admiral went to the visiphone and dialed the zoo. "Admiral Howarden, Curator. I believe the Prime Minister's Tugin was just delivered to you. There was a mistake. Please send it back." Never mind, sir, what the Y is. Just return it immediately." He flipped off the switch impatiently and looked at the young Secret Serviceman with wondering eyes. A Tugin? What on earth did the fellow want with... This was the most amazing man he'd ever seen. But he sure did get results. He turned back to his men. "Anything yet?" "Nothing but ordinary state papers so far, sir," was the consensus. "Keep looking. Remember, we especially want any mention of any planets whose names you do not recognize. Anything about shipbuilding, or about mining, or other planets." Hanlon handed Howarden a note, and the Admiral sent a couple of Marines off on a run. Half an hour later, a truck pulled up in front, and the Marines carried in another desk. It was the one from the back room in the Bacchus Tavern. Hanlon himself went through this, but was quickly disappointed. There wasn't a thing he wanted in any of the drawers. He turned the desk upside down, looking for secret compartments. Finding none, he ordered the Marines to take it to pieces. At a nod from the Admiral, they dismantled the desk. But it was perfectly innocuous. Hanlon was just turning away, disgustedly, when a man came from the zoo with the caged Tugin. At sight of the familiar room, the bird perked up. "Hey, boss!" it called out in a clear but whistling sort of voice. "I'm home again!" Hanlon had no trouble understanding its words, spoken in Simonidean, of course, but was busy examining its mind. He walked over to the messenger and held out his hand. "I'll take the bird." The zoo attendant looked up at him doubtfully. "It's a vicious thing, sir," he said. "Be careful. It already injured one man. They said no one but the Prime Minister can handle it." "It's all right," the Admiral spoke. "Thank you for bringing it in. That will be all." Hanlon took the cage and, giving the Admiral a meaning look, walked out of the room with it. End of Chapter 22. Recording by Josh Broussard.